Strawberry. Pethok half mused, holding out the Terran credit chip. The man scanned the chip, nodded, then scooped out a chunk of pinkish, frosted material and deposited on the open end of the conically wrapped wafer. The Terran handed Pethok the credit chip and the cone, then waved him on. The insectoid warrior moved on, gently testing the cold substance with antenna and equipment, searching to make sure that it was not some type of poison, a mild organic corrosive for cleaning teeth, or a cruel Terran joke that would suddenly eviscerate him in broad daylight in the middle to the street. Complex carbohydrates, frozen dihydrogen oxide, sweetened wafer and no synthetics. It was safe for consumption, and Pethok sliced a piece off with one mandible, drawing the rapidly melting piece into his maw. Melted nicely, and the taste reminded him of fruit, his favorite dish. The cone was not bad either, kind of tuber taste to it. Almost eagerly, he took one more bite to see if it was as good the second time he ingested the strange substance. He was invisible. Nobody paid any attention to him. And he was invincible. That's why no one dared confront him. Pethok looked around slyly with the last realization, searching for a female Trinaid or even a mantis. After all, he was sexy. No female would be able to resist him now. Even the Terran females were glancing in his direction slyly, and for a long moment, Pethok was tempted to trying a cross-species encounter, but changed his mind at the sight of their powerful arms and thick, killing digits. The lights of the city were bright and seemed to emit sounds of their own, turning the city into a sparkling orchestra of sounds that Pethok had never imagined in his life. All of the beings he met were friendly toward him, trying to call the favor of the powerful and wise Pethok, and even the Terrans seemed acceptable, now that he no longer had to fear them, since he was invincible, omnipotent and irresistible. All too soon though, Pethok began worrying that he had forgotten something. Had he revealed himself to some being he should not have? Had he dropped a piece of equipment that would give him away as a Trinaid? Had he offended that large Terran cyborg waiting on the corner with a military carry-all in his large, killing hand? Had he forgotten the correct steps for the recreational mating dance? Dejectedly, he began searching for a place to spend the night. But the huge friendly city now seemed to disdain him, until he moved into a small cluttered side street and huddled up next to a large smelly container that was cold and surrounded by slimy refuse. As liquid dihydrogen oxide began falling from the sky, he curled into a ball, miserable with the thought he might have forgotten something that the hive mothers wanted, and lamenting the fact that no females found his pheromones attractive. Sleep came slowly and fitfully, and he dreamed of the Terran military cyborgs that he had seen on the streets chasing him through the tunnels of his hive home. When Pethok awoke, he discovered some lousy mammal had stolen his foot coverings and rations. Not only was he wet and cold, but he no longer had food that was safe to consume, and his delicate feet would be subject to whatever horrors the Terrans could devise. Fortunately, he still had most of his equipment and the cred sticks hidden away. He rubbed his vestigial wings together as he decided that the only recourse he had was to purchase some ice cream to eat, or he would starve. The passerby for the most part ignored Pethok for the next several days, as he spent all of his money on the delectable substance known as ice cream, trying as many different types as possible. He could not believe that the Terrans had devised so many distinct flavors. What geniuses! Surely the hive mothers would relent and grant the mammals honored being status in the hive if they would just share the wonderful recipe of delightful concoction with a Trinaid. Soon, Pethok began selling some of his definitely non-essential equipment to a nice man on a corner by a house with a friendly Terran woman who had lots of visitors at night. Soon, the man began trading the wonderful substance to simply record Pethok speaking about life in the hive, while two huge Terrans, nearly entirely mechanical, they were so heavily augmented with cybernetics, guarded Pethok from the shadowy foes that sought to bring him down. Despite Pethok's nervousness about the two fearsome combat cyborgs, the friendly man assured him that they were deserters from the Terran military who believed that Terrans and Trineads should work together. Pethok could not believe that a simple street vendor sold something that would make the warrior caste of the Trinead appear harmless to the surrounding Terrans and tourists. Nearly as good as the legends of invisibility. And here was a fool who gave the substance for answers even a larvae would know. What fools these Terrans were. No, they could not be fools, they knew who he was, and they would come and get him soon. Those two bodyguards were in fact Terran military, who were measuring Pethok for a steaming pot and determining what kind of sauce he would taste good coated with and dipped in. Almost clacking with anxiety, Pethok hurried to the nearest spaceport, keeping a whole box of ice cream close at hand the whole way, and boarded a flight to the disputed zone. There, he ordered his freezer stocked full with as many different types of ice cream as he could order. He really wanted to avoid leaving his room. After all, they were out there, waiting to get him, to keep him from breeding with fertile virgins. The whole way to the disputed zone, nobody even suspected the Trinead warrior, who ate nothing but ice cream and rubbed his legs together in glee one moment, and whose antennae trembled with fear the next moment, that they had almost caught him. No one knew that instead of a harmless Manti, peaceful ally of the Terrans, a Trinead warrior, a feared infiltrator to the very cradle of Terrans, itself was among them. Had not the Trinead defeated the Terran military in 22% of all engagements? Had Pethok himself done something no other had ever done, visited the Terran homeworld and survived? Wasn't that man by a large artificial pond of liquid dihydrogen oxide, one of the men who had asked him harmless questions? What exactly was Rocky Road? There was not any chunks of stone, nor did it have any roads in it. The disputed planet Thektaker Decorus was easy to reach, and easier to move from the Terran-occupied areas to the small section of the proto-continent that the Trineads still administered. Before Pethok left the Terran-occupied zone, he stole a large armored ice cream transport vehicle that had been specially outfitted to transport the wonderful material. The camouflage built into the vehicle and the bobbing head of a large Terran, with a bright red nose and strangely multicolored hair, ensured that none of the Terrans would try to stop Pethok as he raced out of the Terran-occupied zone. The severed head atop the vehicle cackled the harsh Terran laughter the entire way, striking fear into everyone, but strangely enough, attracting Terran larvae, who tried to flag Pethok down with cred sticks. Each swarm of Terran larvae made Pethok shudder in terror and reach into the back of the armored transport for another ice cream bar. He was deathly afraid that the small, voracious creatures would manage to stop his armored vehicle and devour him in a larval feeding frenzy. The vicious little larvae were in such a feeding frenzy that they chased him on their large, crushing feet for long distances, their hunting cries loud as they pursued him. He was keening in relief when he finally reached the Trinead-administered zone, pursued by dozens of Terran assault craft who seemed desperate to regain the armored transport's valuable cargo intact, and because of that, could not bring their heavy weaponry to bear. Despite that, the ferocity of the Terran assault troops forced what small, remaining forces the Trinead had off the planet within hours. But Pethok and his invaluable cargo had made it, and once his superiors had sampled the contents of the armored cargo vehicle, they agreed that the loss of a minor planet was nothing compared to the importance of Pethok's discovery. While sampling the prize Pethok had returned with, Clutch leaders decided that they would use their secret weapon and the invisibility that it bestowed upon them on the hotly contested world of Jatikovic, where the Terrans had recently inserted a full clutch of Terran heavy assault marines. Pethok's superiors viewed what tapes Pethok had not sold off and agreed, with ice cream in their possession, the mighty Terrans would suffer the fate of any other primate that dared resist a Trinead. Defeat, death, and devouring. Pethok and the other warriors gathered together to charge the Terran lines. Their weapons were slung as they moved slowly forward through the line, each of them being handed an ice cream cone by the Clutch leader. All present were trembling in anticipation of the substance that would turn them from the universe's lowest form of life, not fit to even gaze upon the stars, much less travel them, to the greatest thing the universe had ever created, the sum of all that was good, wise, clever, sexy, and powerful. They had seen what happened to the Terran Marine station nearby as the Trineid sympathizers stole each ice cream shipment as it came through, snagging it right from the Terran naval transports when they touched down, and leaving boxes full of dirt in the place of the crated refrigeration units the ice cream was shipped in. As the ice cream was stolen, the Trineid watched the Terrans closely to see what effect it would have on the Terran warriors. More and more fighting among brood brothers, lack of equipment maintenance, lackluster patrols, a complete falling apart of discipline, and a force feared galaxy-wide for their discipline and ferocity. The Terrans went from almost machine-like to a clutch of larvae without hive mind touch for guidance. Pethoc's superiors were pleased with Pethoc's discovery of the secret to Terran ferocity and ability to become nearly invincible anywhere. Not to mention the ability to breed like some kind of scavengers infesting a giant corpse. They had planned in lengthy conferences, partaking of the wondrous substance Pethoc had discovered, and finally settling on the morning's operation. During the long trip, having gotten lost several times, they had devoured the cargo of the armored transport and so had to choose a random world to test the power of ice cream on. Wisely, the Clutch Lord had pointed at the map, membranes over his eyes, and stated that this world would be the first to fall. Each Trine had left the bunker complexes that had been their home, scuttling forward on powerful legs, holding the ice cream cones high overhead to grant them invisibility and fearsome combat discipline and skill. Many of the cones were half-eaten, and more than one warrior held an empty hand high into the air, snickering to himself with his cleverness at deceiving his superiors into thinking he had not eaten his issued cone. They drew closer and closer to the Terran lines, not a single shot being fired at them. They could feel a surge of victory as they drew ever closer, soon able to see the Terran Marines staring at them in fear and confusion. Elation filled their hearts as they drew ever closer, coming closer than anyone ever had without being discovered and fired on by the fearsome mammals. Some of the Terrans were bent over, convulsing in terror and their diaphragms spasming, so they uttered sharp barks of fear and chagrin. "Open fire," one of the Terrans bellowed, and the fearsome firepower of the Terran Marines tore the attacking insect warriors apart. Some of them managed to stagger within spitting distance of the Terrans, but none of them ever fired a rifle, one warrior stopping between two Marines to dance and preen at them, displaying his invisibility and cleverness. Pethoc watched the demise of his comrades from behind the boulder, where he had stopped to eat his cone, and any cones within reach, and felt sad. But oh well, more would be hatched to replace them. Pethoc figured he would go back and tell Hive Intelligence what had happened as soon as he finished this ice cream cone, and maybe the bucket of ice cream in the bunker. Author's note: I wrote it sometime in 1990 or 1991 while keeping an eye on the generators at Log Base Alpha, or was it Echo? Because one had a whiny bearing and another was having peak load issues. I was bored on a 6-hour shift and thought this up sitting in a literal hole in the ground with my back against some sandbags. I wrote it on several MRE meal cardboard boxes, left it on the generator, and forgot about it. Sometime later my platoon leader came up, asking me if it was mine. When I told him it was, he told me to keep it as it was funny, and he liked it. So I mailed it to my little sister. When I got back, she gave it to me, and I kind of sort of kept it in the back of my head. I had posted a few other places over the decades I've been online, and always had the universe and world in the back of my head. It's always had a soft spot in my heart as one of the first things I ever wrote outside of school or technical papers. So here he is, in all his glory, along with the Terran Confederacy, a loose organization made up of transhumanity, Terrans who have not only pushed the limits of space and technology, but what it means to be human. Author's name and the link to original text is in the description.